my pleasure to introduce Walter Pullen, who is, we've had to rearrange a few things. This is a person for whom I have a great deal of gratitude. Just as I worked with Rick Good for 35 years, and he passed on Columbus Day. Okay, there's a promise in that. And then we ran into difficulty with the PIP, various kinds. And let's just say that Walter stepped into the breach and helped us immensely. And Kathy, we have a little triangle here, Kathy Manker, Walter, and I, and has brought the new PIP3 forward in very new and very doable way. I'm also grateful for Walter's participation and for his plowing through the curriculum of Moria Federation and even beyond, for his Doctor of Philosophy and Esotericism, and for his constant attendance at the faculty meetings. So Walter's been a real presence in the Moria Federation, USR, a real help, and he has a lot of skills. But I think today you're going to talk about money.
I am indeed.
That too has its place. Walter Pullen.
So thank you for the introduction, and hello to everyone, both here and afar. So I am going to talk today about money and how to actually manifest the divine plan. The key word here being actually. So, Dorothy Parker, that master of wit, she said, if you want to know what God thinks of money, just look at the people he gave it to. And on a more serious note, in the Bible, it's said that it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. Now, there are good rich people out there doing good things, but at least the messages in this context and the warning that comes with them is clear. So, man does not live by bread alone, but neither can he live without bread. And in the Blue Books, the Tibetan says that even the hierarchy works through normal channels and needs money, and even the Christ has need of financial resources in order to reach the needy sons of men. And also, the Bible has a similar quote that says, "For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith, and pierced themselves through with many sorrows." And of course, I should point out that it's not just money is the root of all evil, but rather the love of money is the root of all evil. And I would rephrase that a little bit, that it's not just the love of money, but more fundamentally, it's really the materialistic desire that's the root of all evil. And that leads us to that what we really want here is the right use of money. So let's take a closer look at what money really is. So what is money, really? On a practical level, money is simply a medium of exchange, a way to define the value of something and indicate the trade possibilities that comes with it. Now, the Tibetan calls money concretized energy. which you can really see that really gets to the essence of what money is really doing, which it allows us to do what we want or creatively manifest ourselves. So money really is a form of creative manifestation. And that's really something that affects everybody, no matter their level of evolution. In other words, we are all expressing ourselves in the universe, and at whatever level we're on. And so that leads to a kind of a fundamental rule of money, which is that everybody would like to have more money, and that really everybody, from their own point of view, considers money being misused, and that it could be better spent in the world in alignment with their views. I mean, that's true. Everybody, whether a master walking in the flesh or the most evil, depraved person you can imagine, all of them have their own views of money and think that it would be better if it was spent in alignment with their views. And that, again, just gets to the more fundamental view of money as an individualized life's way of expressing themselves in the world. So it's important to realize a few things about money. One is that money really only plays a role when resources or physical resources are scarce. Like, why is there money? Why aren't things free? And the reason why things aren't free is that, well, we live in a world of limitation, and so we have to face that limitation and find a way to dole things out in moderation, so to speak. I mean, I'd love to have give copies of a published book to everyone, but there's a limited number of copies, and so there has to be some way of defining how that process is done. But that leads us to the concept of that things are limited, at least now, but they don't necessarily have to be, where you can have the concept of an abundant society or a post-scarcity society, where in the future you could have it such that there is enough resources that everyone can have at least their basic needs met, and sometimes even their more extended needs met. And we are, as our society becomes more abundant, moving in that direction, provided it doesn't get too centralized and too much greed misusing and misdirecting it. And so the after-death worlds are pretty close to what I'd call a post-scarcity society. So after you die and go to the astral plane, or at least the upper astral plane or the mental plane, in there, we don't really have the physical limitations that we have in these bodies. And so there really isn't the physical needs that we have here, and there really isn't the money as we think of it on those planes. So that leads us to the question, does money have a role, or could we ever have a society without money? And I would say money is still useful, even in a truly advanced society. Like, visualize a truly hierarchically infused, inspired society, where all initiates of the third degree, and all completely aligned with hierarchy, completely fused in one unified mind. Now, in that society, picture it, would there still be money? And I would say yes, at least in a way of measuring the cost of certain endeavors. Like, say we want to define or create a new railway, and we want to do it up either Canyon A or Canyon B, and in our great society. And you can still have money being useful there in order to define how much would it really cost to make tunnels or bridges and so on. And so in that case, money can still play a role even in a perfect, unified, altruistic, spiritual society. So another thing about money is that money is really action. It's not really a thing as much as it's not really a noun as much as a verb. It's using money in order to create and manifest ourselves. And that is why the Tibetan calls money a great stream of flowing golden substance, which is at least hopefully flowing from the forces of materialism to the forces of light. And that suggests that money, we want to use our resources and not keep them static. and not just have them sit there. In other words, with money, you kind of have to use it or lose it, and you remember that well, you can't take it with you when it comes to the money we have. So, another important thing to realize about money is that it is a group phenomenon. In other words, money requires interaction between, well, individualized units of consciousness, or it requires at least two people in order to have the exchanges going on that money requires. So, for example, if you're stranded on a desert island or living the life of a hermit, money is basically completely useless because you can't spend it on anything or give it to anyone. On that desert island, you're thinking more in terms of real resources like water, food, and so on. And similarly, money you can have money become useless in, say, world calamities. Like if there's a zombie apocalypse and zombies are running around, then it's like there are many stories and movies and such that present those of what that could be like, where money is worthless and it's all about your food or your weapons or your protection and things like that. And those stories, well, they are stories, and it does show that the money system is group agreed upon, and if ever something happens, the group can stop agreeing on it and have money be considered not value, or it can become worthless. But I like to think of it in positive terms, and lets us know that because money is a group phenomenon or a group agreed upon phenomenon, the issues with money that are in our society can be improved. We just have to do it together. So money is, since it is like an abstract phenomenon, it's important to realize that things are worth only what people are willing to pay for them, at least to those people in question. In other words, we may think that it would be nice if some things had value, and they do have increased value to us, but not necessarily to others. And so when forming these connections with others, you basically meet them halfway. In other words, we might think that it'd be nice if teachers that play a super important role in education were paid more, or like why are they paid less than, say, lawyers? And that is, again, at least based on the group that we have now, there's a less emphasis on education and more emphasis on getting your way in the law. So it's important to realize that aspect of money. And related to money being a verb is that, well, money flows and it can be spent multiple times. What that means is that, like, if I buy something, then they take the money that I gave them and they turn around and buy something else. And then they turn around and buy something else. And so $1 spent can hop through a community and be spent like 10 times. And so it's like $10 being worth of exchanges instead of just $1. And that shows the benefits of supporting a local community and having a strong local community. And in comparison to some challenges that have come through where like a large international corporation comes in, sets up shop, all the local companies run out of business, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, or at least a large multinational corporation isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just that when that corporation is selfish, then you spend the dollar in that store once, and then it goes into the pockets of that corporation or in the pockets of the CEO, and it basically leaves the local community. And so, again, a large corporation is not necessarily a bad thing if it's a responsible citizen and can reinvest in the communities in which it works through. So, a brief history of money, or the forms of money that it can take. So, in the old days, before there was any money, there was really only exchanging one thing for another. And that's like the barter system, where if you have a cow farmer and a fisherman, then the cow farmer exchanges one cow for X number of fish. And And there's a few other potential systems, like some form of communal sharing, or it's not always just only barter, but it's, at least as far as exchange goes, that's what you really had before you had any well-defined sense of money. But of course, barter has a certain inefficiencies, like if I want to buy a fish or a new pair of shoes, and I'm a cow farmer, leading cows down the street isn't very practical. And so that led societies to create the first form of money, which is like coins, or a form of money that is based on the physical plane, the mineral kingdom, or the element of earth. And that can be things like precious metals, or gems, or even shells in certain societies. And these coins and other type things, they're like inherently valuable. I mean, you can do a lot of things with, say gold and electronics, and so you have this inherent value of things that you can exchange things for and then use the gold to buy other things. And that works well for like a town or a small society, but it starts becoming heavy or unwieldy in large quantities, where once you start having nations, then, and like the budget of a large country, then having huge piles of gold, that becomes unwieldy. And so that leads us to the next form of money, which is like bills or paper currency. And that is kind of more related to the astral plane, the vegetable kingdom, because bills are made out of like vegetable matter, and the element of water. And so here we have like banknotes that represent wealth, and that's a lot easier, or letters of credit and things like that you can do to exchange for exchange for goods and services. And of course, this means there needs to be a central source that creates those paper bills, and like some governmental source, and they create the money supply, or they print the bills. And yes, that there are some issues or some challenges with that, because you can do once you have paper money, then the source of that, like the government, can print more money, and then you cause inflation. So if you double the amount of money in the world, then basically money becomes half as valuable. And which is basically we could be considered a tax on the holders of that currency. I mean, you can have, inflation can be a issue when you have paper money. And of course, since it's not inherently valuable, you have the issues of counterfeiting, where if you print money and if it's not done accurately, then others could print their own money and that can be indistinguishable from yours and like create their own inflation. So that's a risk or something to be aware of when you have vegetable kingdom money. So the next step, which is where we have become in the last few decades, is virtual money. And that is basically mental plane money, and it's more associated with the human kingdom and the element of air. And that's where money is basically virtual. It's in your computer, it's online, it's zeros and ones. It can be, you can buy things with just a swipe of a credit card, for example. And other things like the rise of cryptocurrencies are also very much related with the virtual form of money. And of course, this also, as you expand to more abstract forms of money, there are new risks when you get to that form. Like with virtual money, you can have money be hacked. Like hackers can tap into the computer and just type how much you have in your bank account or things like that. And so there needs to be proper safeguards in place to have the proper virtual money. Now, that's where we are now. Now, looking to the future, money, I believe, is going to be more energetic. And that will be on the spiritual planes and related to the kingdom of souls and associated with the element of fire. And that will be like, money will be more based on cooperative need and group dynamics, and don't know exactly what that will look like because we haven't gotten there yet, but it's something that can be very interesting to meditate upon. So, a little bit more about money, and to realize that money is again, represents something, at least of the paper and virtual forms of money. In other words, money is usually backed by something. Like in the old days in the United States, money was backed by gold, where it was saying that this banknote may be exchanged for gold, or at least this banknote asserts that there is this amount of gold in Fort Knox or whatever. And that has its advantages and disadvantages, and the United States was on the gold standard, but in the 1930s, we moved off of it, and, well, basically money backed by gold is fixed, or by other things, which means unless you mine more gold, the money supply is static. And sometimes it is nice to be able to print more money and to be able to increase the money supply. Like one of the perhaps the best thing to back money with is based on the productivity of a nation, or the gross domestic product of a nation, which means as our technology expands and as we become more abundant, so can the amount of money in existence. That prevents inflation or deflation. But of course, again, that needs to be done wisely by the government or whatever source is in control, because you can, with abuse, overprint money and create inflation. Like there was that period between the world wars when Germany had hyperinflation and printed so much money that you had to have a wheelbarrow full of money just to buy a postage stamp. And so that shows what can happen if money is not managed properly. And so yes, another thing about money is that it is, again, a group phenomenon, and we are agreeing that this money exists and that this amount is valuable. So I know there's the issue of like the rich or the super rich that have billions and billions while others are starving. And in a sense, the super rich are rich because, well, the majority of the group agrees that they are or should be rich. In other words, most wealth is a virtual thing. Like if you take the richest person in the world, they're really not that rich on a physical level. In other words, they have a mansion, maybe a few fancy cars, but other than that, all their wealth is like ones and zeros in a bank account, and that's what gives them the power, and we're basically agreeing that they have that power based on the monetary system that we've all bought into. And so yes, the rich have a certain responsibility, but in another way, we shouldn't necessarily blame them as much as blame the system that created the problem in the first place. We can change the system. So a bit more about cryptocurrencies that have recently become popular. And so like the most popular being Bitcoin. And well, Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies can be both good and bad. The good thing about a cryptocurrency is that it's very private and that the government can't track you or track what you're spending. The bad part about cryptocurrencies is exactly the same thing. In other words, a cryptocurrency keeps harmful aspects of government off your back, but it also prevents potentially good aspects of management. In other words, on the deep web, most of the Bitcoin is primarily used for criminal activities like drug running or human trafficking or other nefarious deeds in the underbelly of our planet. And so it is a tool and that can be used or misused. And right now it's a little bit of both. And the other point about cryptocurrencies is it really shows kind of the nature of money is that Bitcoin is not backed by anything. It's not tied to gold or not tied to the gross domestic product of a nation. It just is. And the only reason why people give Bitcoin value is because other people do. In other words, it's purely speculative, and people buy it because other people are buying it, or people are buying it because they can sell it to other people for similar amounts. So in a sense, it's a huge mental construct or a big illusion. And also, at least for Bitcoin, is you can mine more or create more money in limited quantities, but it requires like running things on your computer or doing a bunch of calculations to create new Bitcoins. And so it's kind of wasting electricity, as many people are just running their computers, doing crazy things just to create more virtual currency. And because, I mean, at least mining real gold has a practical use, because gold can be used in jewelry and electronics and so on. But Bitcoin, is kind of like this game or this illusion that is being engaged in by many. However, there are some positive currencies. I mean, many people have heard of Bitcoin, but not as many have heard of bit seeds. Now, what's a bit seed? Well, a bit seed is an alternate type of cryptocurrency, which is tied to or backed by the number of trees in the world. And so that means if you want to mine more or create more bit seeds currency, you go and plant trees. And so that's interesting, because that means even the materialistic greedy types will want to improve our climate and plant trees in order to get benefit from it. So that's a very interesting way to harness greed or work with that. And again, this is an example of some of the new ideas that are going into our world at this time. And again, if it just has enough, BitSeed can be just as popular as Bitcoin if enough people were backing it or aligned with it. So we should realize that that wealth that is not just money. There are other forms of wealth that we work with. Like, for example, we have other assets or other physical assets, such as time or fame. Like, there are like YouTube stars that have like millions of followers, and that's actually a form of wealth, even if they're not getting paid for it, because they can do a lot with it. And our knowledge, or the virtues and qualities we've developed, or even just happiness in general, those are all forms of wealth. Because remember, money doesn't make you happy. And sometimes it's the richest people that are the most unhappy in life. So that's where the saying, time is money, comes from. Or at least, I would say time is rather a form of wealth, an important form of wealth. And just as there are forms of wealth other than money, there are also costs in life other than money. In other words, the things we do may cost us in time, they may cost us in, well, sanity, they may cost us in our values if we sacrifice them, and we should realize that some things just aren't worth it. Like, related to time, procrastination is an issue that some of us struggle with on the path, and procrastination is basically an inefficient use of the asset of time. And procrastination, it implies like a conflict between two different options, where like if my brain wants to meditate, but my lunar nature wants to watch TV, that is a conflict that needs to be resolved. So there's a saying about time, and it's, youth is wasted on the young. That means that very often when we're young, we had all that physical vitality, but some of us, at least, we frittered it away or did not very useful service-oriented things. And then when we're older, we finally get on the right path, but then we're a little bit more, well, older and more tired. Like, the Tibetan wished his disciples were younger in certain cases. Like here, he was saying, "Were you 20 years younger, my brother?" But for those of us who have reached a certain level of maturity in our physical life, we can take heart, because the Tibetan also has this to say. So many in the final years of life live, think, and act in such a manner that the soul withdraws its attention. Thus only the personality remains. To all of you who have passed the half-century, I would say, face the future with the same joy as in youth, yet with an added usefulness, knowing that the wisdom of experience is yours, the power to understand is yours, and that no physical limitation can prevent a soul from useful expression and service. So, money is very much related to Ray 3. This is a Ray 3 conference. It happens to be the 33rd annual conference. And on a personal note, I noticed in the guides that this particular talk has ID number 3333 in the schedule. So yes, there's a lot of threes going on. And yes, so Ray 3 is intelligent creative activity, and that very much aligns with money, which is the physical creative activity that allows us to creatively manifest and do things. So there's a huge amount that can be said astrologically about Ray 3 and its relation to money, but just a few super brief points. There is the Ray 3 planet Saturn, which conditions the practical manifestation and, of course, the sometimes hard lessons that we learn from it. There's also the purely Ray 3 sign Libra, which deals with the choices we make, what do we want to do with our time and our money. It's also, Libra is the balance of supply and demand, and the negotiations and monetary transactions. All of those align with Libra. And also, Ray 3 is also manifests along the Cancer-Capricorn axis, which also brings in Rays 1 and 7 for those signs. So we have, in those signs, we have Cancer's lighted house that we hopefully therein dwell, which can integrate the spirit into material and hopefully use the material appropriately. And there's also Libra and the balance between the lines of force, the material and the spiritual, again. And then there's Capricorn, which at least hopefully overcomes ambition and doesn't let the door stand wide, so to speak. And so anyway, all this shows us that there's important evolutionary energies going through Ray 3 and by extension through our use and potential misuse of money, and therefore our individual and collective struggles with money are serving a purpose and producing evolutionary growth. So, the personal identity profile, version 3, the PIP test, has a few statements about money. And a little spoiler, these statements do indicate Ray 3. So here's a few very Ray 3 statements. I enjoy moving money here and there according to my best anticipation of profit. If that's definitely true for you, then you can expect some Ray 3. Or, my intelligently adaptable nature and my shrewd foresight of commercial trends make business activity my natural field of expression. I mean, some relate to that, some don't, but that's definitely a Ray 3, at least one of the Ray 3 types goes along with that. And also, more than many people, I like to be smart with money, speculating, investing, and using my wits to generate profit. So those three statements, they are neither good nor bad. I mean, they are just inherent approaches that you have to life, and you can use the money either altruistically or selfishly. And so again, those statements, they are definitely Ray 3, but like with all the rays, there are higher and lower expressions of that ray energy. So we know a little about money. How do we get it? Well, to start with, there's a few practical ways. We can earn money, we can be given money by others, or we can save money. And it's like, that's where a penny saved is a penny earned, classic statement comes from. However, more esoterically, there's a few other approaches to money. And that is, here's this statement: need, love, and magnetic power are the three things which consciously or unconsciously attract money. Now, a lot of people need money, but we have to realize there's a bit more to it than that. And here's another statement that goes a little further. And that is, the need in the past has not always been real, though it has been felt. Such is the world glamour and illusion. The love has been selfish and unreal. The demand for things material has been for that which is not necessary to health or happiness. So it needs to be real need and real love, and real magnetic power. Okay. And then also there's another part about money is this statement: realize the occult law that to those who give shall be given, so that they can give again. that again relates to money being a river, and that it's not just something that you want to hold on to, but if you let it flow, then the next part of the river from upstream will come down and let that flow, and then it can really be truly a stream of flowing golden substance. Now, investment is another important concept related to money and gaining it. So investment is basically putting in effort now for a better payoff later. It's like a bow, like the Sagittarian bow. You pull something back one direction so that when you release it, it goes stronger in the other direction. And investment I consider very Saturnian in nature because it requires discipline and waiting and understanding time. So there are some obvious investments, like at least in the United States, you have the IRA, individual retirement accounts, your 401k accounts, or stocks that you can buy or invest in. However, you can not just invest for physical return that many do. In other words, many treat, say, the stock market as just a purely material thing. Where can I put my money so that I get the most out of it? And then you can, they'll invest in like oil companies or anything like that, and it doesn't really matter as long as I get money out of it. And you can do that, but that's a material approach and doesn't really promote any better qualities. You can also invest in, being conscious of where we put our money and investing in companies that are promoting good things in the world or that are green. So there's even some green indexes out there that you can invest in. And again, it's corporations and stocks are basically rise because other people are putting value into them. So in other words, if everyone puts their money into good things or good companies, they will become successful. It's, again, very much a group phenomenon. And of course, I can't mention investment without what I would consider the biggest investment of all, which is the spiritual path. I mean, the whole spiritual path, I would say, is an investment. We are putting effort into taking the steeper path instead of living an easy life, and that creates many new opportunities for expression and service if we are willing to follow that path. I mean, the spiritual path is also a journey and not just a destination in the future, but I do consider it what I would call the biggest investment of all. And that's why we can, say, invest in education, whether in a practical sense or in an esoteric sense, where investing in our education, we spend time developing new skills now so that in the future we can use those skills better. And that shows that there is other types of say, investment in our society. Like, for example, you can invest in, say mental health treatment centers, and that actually can really help society. In other words, some may say, well, why should my taxpayer dollars going into helping these people? And leaving out the compassion aspect of it, even from a purely practical point of view, investment in society and in the poor or whatever does have practical benefits because it prevents later costs. In other words, if we help give people the mental health treatment they need, then they won't potentially be criminals or do crazy things. I mean, it's practical, being practical to invest in our society. And that leads me to what I consider one of the best investments of all time, or what I would call the most hierarchically inspired actions of the 20th century, and that was the Marshall Plan at the end of World War II. And so that was where the United States helped rebuild Europe after the destruction of the Second World War to help rebuild it. And this was interesting because there was some opposition to it. It was like, well, again, why should we use our money to rebuild them? And especially why rebuild Germany? Weren't they our enemy? And of course, but of course the result of that was most excellent. Like rebuilding Germany and Japan, I mean, they went basically overnight from our enemies to strong allies. And so anyway, some people back at the end of the World War, they didn't want to support the Marshall Plan. And however, it was stated that, well, if we don't rebuild Europe, it's going to be, say, in shambles, and we're not going to be able to sell our American goods in Europe. So it was so basically with that, even the greedy supported the Marshall Plan, and even the materialistic side of things supported it. So it was a rare example where the forces of materialism and the forces of light agreed on something and worked together on something. So it shows that cooperation is, at least in certain circumstances, possible. Okay, and another consideration is, well, efficiency. That's a very Ray 3 term. We have which is basically efficiency is related to the law of economy, and there's the other, which is kind of a third aspect law, as opposed to the law of attraction, law of synthesis, which are more like Rays 2 and 1. Basically, efficiency and law of economy is we take the easiest path. And so I would say that greed is, well, an example of efficiency expressing on certain levels of consciousness. In other words, negative elements basically, by nature, just take advantage of what they can, which means basically taking as much as possible. Or basically, we shouldn't take it personally. It's just a fact of certain elemental lives and the way they work. Or in a practical analogy, as water flows downhill. So an example of inefficiency is war, where, again, ignoring the harmful lack of love aspects in war is simply inefficient because it's wasteful and destructive, and it destroys goods that we spent time building and that could be used elsewhere. So we can realize that, well, we are all one, and all paths lead to the divine. However, we should recognize that there are efficient and inefficient ways of following the path and getting there. And so I would say the easy way is preferred over the hard way on the path, but of course it is sort of human nature that we often tend to need the hard lessons or take the hard way there. And then I would say remark that efficiency isn't everything. In other words, we don't want to be glamored by efficiency. There are some Ray 3 glamours that are important to remember. There's the Ray 3 glamour of efficiency that treats efficiency as like some divine prerogative, where again, efficiency is okay in and of itself, but it's what you direct it toward that counts. And similarly, there's the Ray 3 glamour of being busy, which is doing this and that and this and that. And again, being busy is only useful if infused with the right ideals and directed toward the right things. So let's take another look at greed, where abstention from avarice is one of the 5 commandments given in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. And on a similar note, we have money, or at least money selfishly cornered, so to speak. It's one of the 9 heads of the hydra of the personality, which each of us faces in the Scorpio labor of Hercules. So what is greed? Greed is basically desire misplaced. In other words, there's 2 components to greed. One is too individual. I'm too focused on my individual self and not others. And also greed is too material. We're focused on dense things as opposed to more lofty and spiritual things. And therefore, overcoming greed, whether in ourself or others or the world as a whole, also has 2 methods. One is expansion, which is not just being so isolated in the separate individual self, but being able to identify with other people or with the world as a whole or other nations and so on. And also overcoming greed has the refinement aspect to it, which means also, again, spiritualizing what we're interested in. And we should also realize that greed is not just individual, but it also can apply to groups. You can have group greed or nations, where you can have national greed. And those are important considerations to be aware of and also work to overcome. So here's a quote that relates to greed. It's, "Most people work just hard enough to not get fired and are paid just enough not to quit," by George Carlin. And that gets to sort of a universal, an important concept, where there is sort of still the the not working together. In other words, employees are wanting to just get paid and just get their money, and then the corporation's paying them. They don't really care about them. They just want to extract what they can from them. And that gets into one of the problems of humanity, specifically the problem of capital and labor, where there's competition between them now, but they will eventually reconcile and cooperate. So, money. Money, when you have money, it means responsibility. So Spider-Man, the Marvel superhero, has a quote, "With great power comes great responsibility." And another way of looking at it is the French statement, "Noblesse oblige," which means nobility obligates, which means that if you have money and resources, it is your responsibility to hopefully at least use them altruistically and in a way that helps the world. So the Tibetan has a line that is, "What is my personal responsibility in regard to money which passes through my hands? Am I handling it as a disciple of the masters should handle it?" Which, speaking of responsibility, there is, with respect to initiation, there is one of the main signs of actually being initiated is when you're given more work and responsibility. And so, many people are eager for initiation. I want the next initiation. But, some people occasionally, you can realize that there's like, oh, I don't know if I'm ready for that. And I don't know if that means they're necessarily closer to initiation, but it means they at least have a more realistic view of it. Okay. So yes, when you have money, there are basically two options you can do with it responsibly. One is you can spend it yourself for good causes, or another is you can, let someone else do the work and give the money to others to spend, which is basically being a philanthropist. And so if you're looking for a way to a good source to put money into, I should say that the Seven Ray Institute and the University of Seven Rays, who is putting this conference together, they are registered as nonprofit educational organizations, and you can see on sevenray.org/donate. There's Patreon links as well as PayPal links there. So check it out. Okay, so there are a few seed groups related to money, and there is the Tibetan's seed group 9 about the financiers and economists, and there are basically two parts to them. One is the financiers, which is basically focused on better spending wealth, which is more about sharing the pie. And then there's also the economists, which is the other half of that seed group, and they basically create wealth, which is kind of like making a larger pie. And basically, we can each be a part of the seed group. In other words, through our own work or through the wise expenditure of our own resources, we can each be a financier and an economist in our own lives. And it's also related to seed group 10, the creative workers, which has members from the first 9 seed groups. They're related to money too. As it says here, they are closely related to the 9th group because they bring about a concretization of the energy of desire. This in turn brings about the creation of things incidentally. Therefore, they are concerned with the concretization of money. And I'd also indicate the relation to seed group 5, the political organizers, who define monetary policy and direct the use of money in a nation or society. So it's kind of like the bridge of a ship versus the engine room. The political organizers are on the bridge, like directing it where to go, while the financiers and economists are the engineers down in the engine room that give you the power for the ship to do whatever it does in the first place. And remember that through voting, we can each be our own political organizer. So, there are some spiritual approaches to money, and there are some meditations on money, and we should realize that the right use of money, which is really the right use of energy and our material activity, is really so important that there is a meditation in the Blue Books, Attracting Money for Hierarchical Purposes. And similarly, the Morya Federation, the 5-year Quest Universal program, features this meditation in its program. It's actually included every week for 4 years through years 2 through 5. So you can check that out too. Oh, and then also we have the Ask Project webinars to ask for help for humanity also conduct this meditation. So if you want to do it in a group form, that's makara.us is another place to check out. So anyway, what can we do to manifest the plan? The answer, whatever we can. And here's a line. The second requirement for the workers of the Christ is to make those sacrifices and arrangements which will enable them to give to the limit of their capacity. There must not be simply a trained ability to present the subject, but each worker must practice what he preaches. If, for instance, the millions of people who love the Christ and seek to serve his cause give at least a tiny sum of money each year, there would be adequate funds for his work, and therefore the second prerequisite is for everyone to give as they can. And in other words, whether the sum is large or small, it can become an attractive and magnetic unit in the master's plans, which is really true because it's the energy behind what we do is just as important as what we materialize. And, oh, I see that looks like we're near the end of time here. I can do just another minute? Okay. So, manifesting the divine plan. In summary, so hey, it's easy to manifest. It's not so easy to manifest the divine plan. And we should realize that the rules for white magic from Treatise of White Magic, they also apply in many ways when using money rightly and doing it in a soul-infused fashion. And we should realize that we do form an interconnected web with everyone around us. And of course, some parts of that web are a little bit darker or undeveloped. And so how do we deal with those undeveloped parts? Well, we intelligently recognize their traits. I like to think of material things as like mold, like moldy bread. And realize that mold grows where it can. And it's nothing personal. Like you don't blame the mold if you leave bread out and it gets moldy. We blame ourselves for not putting our bread in the clear, cold light of the refrigerator. And for another analogy, it's like, consider mosquitoes. Like, we don't blame mosquitoes for trying to bite. They're just doing what they're doing at their own level of evolution. And we know that, like, dogs can be trained and children can be taught and disciplined, but mosquitoes you can't really negotiate with. They just are. So with mosquitoes, you have to basically use repellent or just close the door and keep them outside. So may we seal the door where mosquitoes dwell. But anyway, yes, it is the right use of money is tied to spiritual evolution, where each helps the other. In other words, by using money rightly, that helps our growth, but also by spiritually growing, that in turn influences the right use of money. And so really, to create the group anachrona, we each create our own individual anachronas. And similarly, if we want to externalize the hierarchy, we should start with externalizing the soul within our own selves. And that will allow us to actually manifest the divine plan. Thank you very much.
Okay.